and welcome to Erupt, the home for how businesses can scale and transform. Throughout this podcast, we aim to inspire and educate to help you and your business thrive. Across the course of our episodes, we'll be interviewing industry leaders to uncover some of the challenges across the world of work. We aim to give an insight into some of the fastest growing organisations across HR and technology. Please follow us on our journey to erupt and elevate your business. In today's episode, we discuss the topic of navigating making a difference as HR. This episode explains how EasyJet and its operations were affected by the pandemic and how they adjusted to survive. This panel included Ella Bennett, Group People Director at EasyJet, and Simon Cunniffe, HR Shared Services Director at EasyJet.
So Ella, what were the immediate decisions from a board perspective when the pandemic hit that were priority one?
This is a horrible thing to think back to, but I think understanding initially the impact that it was having on our people and customers, ensuring things like health and safety and well-being, that has to be your number one priority. Clearly, impacts were different in different locations. We operate across lots of countries across Europe, and I do remember we were grounded in Italy first, and we started to learn some lessons from that grounding about what messages we need to give to our people, to our customers. So it was a bit like a kind of tsunami as the different grounding started to happen over Europe. And then I suppose as that happened, then our thoughts turned to more practical business things like cash burn and liquidity. After we'd thought about some of the other things around people and customers, we started, like all companies would have done, we started sort of thinking about our operational resilience and how we would work from home, like lots of people have done, making sure we got the right technology in place, making sure that I suppose some of the right key messages were given, both externally to our customers, but also internally, so people understood what was going on, but also how to operate and do their roles. Repatriating customers, obviously for an airline, this was just huge. All our income streams were turned off at once. So there's this kind of dual thing about thinking about safety and people, but also then thinking about the impact of the business and what we needed to do to preserve that business. So that was, those were some of the initial things.
Yeah. And listen, it was obviously very well publicized, certainly, the aviation and airline industry, the challenges that you face. Two things you mentioned there. So the initial part you mentioned around kind of assessing the impact. How hard was it to do that? And this is a kind of two-pronged question, if you like. How hard was it to actually assess the impact that was having across all the different geographies and the different business areas? And then the technology piece, which is obviously critical in terms of companies pivoting to making sure that people could work from home. How difficult was it to kind of get your arms around those things, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for us is what we did with crew, all our operations across all of those places, and to some extent working from home was a sort of secondary kind of thing. And I think your question about assessing the impact, I think in some ways you were just every day starting again, almost each single day, saying what's happened, what do we know, what actions do we need to take? And I think that was probably the same for lots of people, but that real sense of the only way you could work out what you needed to do was to kind of reassess almost and start again. And we set up ways of working so that we could do that, first with the leadership team, and then I'd meet my team and other teams would meet, and we kind of get into a rhythm of doing that. So yeah, I think the technology, like for everyone, we had to get used to using some of the technology, and we had to kind of move fast to do that. But for us, the primary thing was, how do we then deal with all of our crew who are now grounded and can't work, and we speak to 27 different unions across 8 jurisdictions, and so it was important that we started those conversations and worked out what different governments were doing across Europe.
Yeah. No, it sounds very complex, as you could imagine, and it kind of blends quite well to the next question for yourself, Simon. Obviously, you mentioned that ever-changing situation on a day-to-day basis. So, how did HR, Simon, mobilize as a function and also as a facilitator for change?
Yeah, so it's interesting looking back on hindsight, because I think it's similar to what Ella mentioned a little bit. Probably the pace of the change was the bit that was completely relentless. We were in a daily dialogue as a leadership team around what we're going to do and how do we enable things. And I would say that pace was excellent, and that element of really thinking around decisions that needed to be made on that day was, just phenomenal as a kind of a leadership team. I would say our big focus from an HR perspective was, first of all, around how do we keep people safe, and then secondly, how do we make sure that management have got support for decisions that need to be made on a local level. And again, to give you an idea of scale complexity for us, we're describing 8 different countries. We're describing at least 27 different union agreements. And I guess some of the big ticket items that HR needed to get their kind of head around very early on in the day was furlough. So furlough as a process is different in every one of our European jurisdictions. So we as a team needed to have really great knowledge of that. Over time, as we got kind of into some of the issues, we needed to think around what does that mean for costs, for cash burn of an organization. Then ultimately, Magnus, we needed also to think about, as we step through this, what's the structure that we need in place to be able to run and mobilize the business moving forward. And again, one of the things that I'm sure we'll get onto is that adjustment to hybrid working probably initially was not even a thought for us as an organization. And the reason being is, we sort of had the technology there, but actually the bigger, more wider macro, I'll use the word business survival, was actually critical to what we were doing. And I would say, Ella, that the big thing for me around the HR team was actually, I think we've changed an awful lot as a result of this. We've become far more agile in our approach. And that sort of discipline and rigor, Magnus, around chatting on a daily basis, we've absolutely taken forward in terms of how we work now, which has been great.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, Simon, to you again, taking into account all the things you've just mentioned, how have you personally kind of managed the last 18 months? What will you take forward into the future in terms of that approach that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I always laugh about this question a little bit, because I was a month into my journey in EasyJet. So I joined the business, which has been incredibly successful as an organization. And a month in, the issues in Italy were kind of emerging. And I remember, Ella, we had people in Italy at the time, just at the point of when it was all kind of going to kick off, really. And I guess what I would say is, it's actually been a great opportunity for me personally, Magnus, because I've learned loads around a really complex business, and probably it's accelerated my learning of the business, because you've got to know very early on, what's happening at an operational level. What does that mean for our flying agenda as an organization? I've personally learned an awful lot around our engagement with trade unions. We're engaging on a regular basis throughout this kind of decision around trade union engagement. The decision making as an organization has needed to be rapid, and I would say probably rapid than it has been previously. I would say, and again, EasyJet has made some great investments in technology in the past. I'm not sure historically we've always got the best out of some of those investments. So again, we've done a lot around really making the most of things like Workday, which is our core ERP platform. What the big things I'll personally take forward probably will be around how do we come together as a team to deliver a simplified change agenda. The importance of really early business engagement. So, and again, hopefully myself and Ella have stressed this, but it was really important that we spoke to the organization on a regular basis around things, and really look to involve them in some of the change journey that we're going through as a business. And then I would just sort of say, as a line manager of people, it was really important, more so than ever before, that if everyone is remote, the need to have regular conversations with individuals to check on their health and well-being was super critical. And personally, I would say the ability to switch off as a leader during this time has proved particularly difficult. And again, I think you take learnings from that as a result.
No, fantastic. And quite rightly, you kind of humbly spoke about the development opportunities that coming into a complex business like EasyJet kind of gave you, Simon. But how much value do you think there was in coming in and only being a month into the role and being able to kind of see things from fresh eyes and having a different way of working, if you like, from the status quo?
Yeah, I think you kind of come in with a bit of fresh eyes, Magnus. I think you come in thinking about things in a different way. You think you come at things probably on a less emotive level and more of a process-driven way, which for me was super helpful. But I guess
to an extent we did what we were going to do anyway. We just sort of accelerated it, didn't we?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the element of learning reflection as a team was absolutely critical to that.
Okay, brilliant. And I'll direct this one to yourself, Ella, who's been there a lot longer than Simon has. But how has your kind of like HR leadership team evolved over the course of the last year?
I mean, I think it goes without saying how proud I am of what the leadership team, the people leadership team have achieved, and then the whole team. So it has really been a team effort. And they've worked tirelessly. They've shown amazing resilience and amazing teamwork. I think in terms of how they've evolved, we've really had to adapt, to some extent, be more hands-on and kind of deal with the information that we had and what was coming, and be flexible and change the plan when we needed to. But I think that's given us a much sharper focus about what's important. And certainly I think that's reflected then in the people plan going forward, is a much sharper focus on what we can deliver and what's important, how you deliver change, and how that's connected to the business agenda. I think the other thing is, I think they've really all of them stood up as leaders, and I think that's been really important. So there was just no time for, there was no time to debate something. They had to go and lead something, and all of them did that, and all worked really well together to deliver that, all stood by each other, which was impressive. We've had some changes in the team over the 18 months, and I've been very thoughtful about then what we needed to bring into the team. So it's not the same skill set as it was before we started. And like Simon referred to, I think some of the habits of how we work together that we started during the pandemic have stuck. And I think those of how we kind of engage daily to kind of make sure we kind of know what the priorities are. We share stuff much more, but also I think how we handle change in the organization, we've kind of learned. So those are the big changes.
Yeah, no, understood. And actually, in terms of what I was actually thinking, so I had a lot of conversations during that pandemic with various kind of like senior leaders within the kind of people side of things, and the question that kept coming up was, whilst HR kind of looks after the business and the people, who looks after HR? So Simon touched upon it in terms of switching off. So it'd be good to get your view on that, Ella, as well, because obviously it took its toll on everyone, right?
I mean, I think it has been. Yeah, it's been really hard. I think the thing that shifted was we have been much more when we were able to, much more serious about people taking holidays and making sure they had proper breaks, but also of making sure that we covered for each other. So I think really, that was the biggest thing that happened in, as we sort of came towards holiday time, is that people actually went off and were able to switch off, and the rest of the team were able to pick up and cover. And I think that really helped in a time when actually there was then not much differential between work and home, day and night for a while.
Yeah. And this is kind of aimed at both of you. Sorry to stay on this subject, but how How difficult was it to switch off, given the positions that you're in, given that you've got teams looking up to your expertise and experience? How difficult did you find it to actually switch off?
I would say fairly impossible, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, would be my
Imagine.
perspective. I think some of the things we did, Ella, that were quite good was we introduced quite early on in the cycle. We were, had conversations around how you're doing at home, what stuff going on. We had, I'd say the level of conversation was not about task for me, but about, how are you feeling and what you're doing about this, and are you taking time back? But my honest reflection would be certainly the first 6 months, I don't think we switched off massively as a team.
And I don't think yet. I think this is not just for EasyJet. This is for I think for lots of organisations and lots of people. I don't think yet we can understand the impact of that, of how that really was on people, because I think it was a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, of course. And to you again, Ella, have you seen the role of HR evolve from the kind of, in inverted commas, put out the fire role that it was in 2020?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has. I think, well, in EasyJet, we were always firmly in the business, but I think we're even more so, really. I think we're kind of, we kind of take centre stage as a function that helps lead the organisation and lead change, which I think is, it's really good for the people team. We've necessarily become had more of an investor mindset, because we've had to make really tough decisions about what we can and can't spend money on. So I think more commercial, more cost aware, more business oriented. And when you're having to choose things, I think that connects you more to the business about what's really important. So more than ever, I think it's a function that's very business connected. And clearly we do that through all those connections with the business, not just the leadership team, but also especially the HR business partners, who are a massive voice for their businesses. And I think there's a whole thing about anticipating change, thinking about org design, thinking about how to embed change. That, I think those things were always important, but are much more important. And then I think the other thing that really strikes me is this has been a human pandemic. This has been about people. It's affected people. It's affected everyone. It's very human. And I think to some extent the people function has then therefore been at the heart of that kind of need to kind of understand that the human aspect for people. And I think it's therefore shifted our thinking about how we are as a function and what appropriate interventions are for the kind of humanness, for the care, for the well-being in the organisation.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And that's why I kind of asked a couple of questions around the whole kind of like switching off piece and just making sure that you're in the right place mentally to be able to lead. And then obviously from an employee perspective. So Simon, taking that all into account, what have you reimagined for your employees as part of your employee experience agenda?
Yeah, so I would say from an employee experience, what we've tried to do is to focus on a few things, to focus on the digital experience, but really create a really simplified experience for people from a digital perspective. So I would say, and what I mean by that is we focused on not just the technology. So I guess consultants that may be hearing this kind of podcast, the obvious thing you'll hear about is putting new technology in. And actually that isn't really where we focused our time and efforts. We focused it on the processes, the policy, and then finally the technology. And I would say the human element for me would be around how to create a really simplified change journey for managers and employees to consume. So the types of things we've done is we've done a lot on mobile enabled solutions for our employees. So in other words, if I'm an employee and I want to, I don't know, check my performance, apply for absence or leave or whatever, how do we make that mobile enabled? One of the mantras we've talked about fairly consistently as a leadership team is around an emphasis within our HR agenda on moments that matter for individuals. So in other words, really thinking in detail around the processes when you join a business. And again, if you think about the employee life cycle from hire to retire, there's a process that matters for an individual. And what we're starting to gear up our agenda to do is to think about those things and ensure that the experience that we offer for individuals is as brilliant as possible. And what I would say is that the working we've done on things like hybrid working and remote working has really emphasized to us that technology is not the be all and end all, but it's about the simplification journey that's really important to individuals.
Okay.
And I guess for me, when I talk about employee experience, I always think about the consumer digital experience that individuals have. So if you think about, say, I don't know, when you're on Amazon and you're shopping for something, you've never been really trained on how to do this. It's just kind of fairly straightforward to do, and it's easy and it's seamless. And I guess that, in essence, to me, is where we need to take HR. That it feels like a really straightforward experience, but actually, if you're a busy line manager and you're engaging with HR, you want it to be an experience that you get the support you need at the right point. But actually, the bulk of the time, you can kind of self-serve and get on with it yourself.
Okay, Ella, is there anything you'd like to add to that around the whole employee experience piece?
Well, so it seems to me, I mean, I think it's always been really important. And I think if you think about EasyJet, it has a very easy customer journey with our app, and that's what we're known for. And I'd love that to be reflected in the internal people experience. But I also think when we think about sort of retention and what makes it, what makes us able to keep people at work, I think some of that stuff is important. To kind of people's ease of doing their roles is important, and we have a role to play in making sure that experience is as good as it can be for people.
Yeah. And listen, as you both know, it takes a while and a lot of hard work for change to land. From an adoption perspective, obviously you didn't have time, right? It had to happen, and it had to happen quickly. How did you find that piece, Simon?
Probably hybrid working is the best example I could provide of how we delivered something that was, I think, a bit different from an adoption perspective. So the types of things we did with hybrid working, and this was about, I guess, a bit like our approach post-pandemic, which is how's everyone going to come back into the office. So we started with quite early focus groups with line managers and different personas in the business to really get their understanding of how they'd like to come back in the office. We engaged heavily with some of the questions around well, what's that going to be, how do you feel about that. And then it was really important for us to spend time with our line management community. So we did a lot that was quite different here, which was really about training line managers on the discussions that we wanted them to have with individuals in the business, making them feel confident about coming back into the office. We did things that were a bit different, Magnus, like redesigning the office, like having different layout of where people sat within the office, giving them flexibility about the days that they came in. And again, why did we do that? Because we talked to people early on in the process around what they would like. And then again, as we sort of stepped through that change to hybrid working, what we've not said is the model's fixed, full stop, but we've kind of said what we're going to do moving forward is pulse check how that's received by the organization and flex our model. So I would say that kind of example I've given you just gives you an example of many of the processes we took across the pandemic, but how we worked tirelessly with the organization to deliver that change. And a little bit to Ella's point, actually, HR thinking in a commercial lens, so thinking with a commercial lens, but explaining it with empathy to individuals and allowing managers the flexibility to describe that to their people.
Yeah. Okay.
And also because so many of our people have to be don't get the opportunity to hybrid work. They're out there with the general public now. We're flying again. So safety first has always been really important for EasyJet, and that sort of taking that sort of working hand in hand with our biosecurity to do really good thinking about how we create a safe environment, both for flying but also in our offices. Yeah,
fantastic. And you both kind of touched upon it, and it certainly lends well to the last couple of minutes that what we've been discussing. So Ella, with the great resignation apparently upon us, how has EasyJet been kind of looking at retention as a priority?
It's clearly a really interesting time because a lot of people are using this as an opportunity to rethink their careers and their life and where they want to be and what they want to be doing. And I think we're experiencing that like everyone else. And we touched on the fact that actually this has been a really hard 18 months for people, and they haven't been able to switch off and get a lot of rest. So it's clearly something that we're addressing. It's one of the priorities in our kind of plan for the coming year. And I think, and we've broken it down into a number of work streams. Talent is, talent and how we manage talent and succession has to be, I think, really hands-on, has to be regular, has to be almost going back to basics on some of that, and making talent management really high touch, knowing what we're going to do, knowing what our critical roles are, what critical skills are. But then, interestingly, we're finding it really easy to attract people to EasyJet. We've got a really good brand. So it's kind of making sure we build on some of those messages, and making sure those messages are clearly out there in the market about why you'd come, what you'd learn, how much, how exciting an industry it is, how much kind of change experience you'll get. And I think a lot of that works. It's just kind of capturing it so that we get those messages out. And then also, thinking broadly about reward, broadly about retention, touching on reward, touching on the stuff we said about employee experience, but also making sure that we think about it for all of the different populations. So it's quite high touch for different populations.
Yeah, no, of course, fantastic. And Simon, it would only be right if I also ask your opinion on that, with retention just being such a I guess, it's a huge topic, and certainly in this current market for sure.
Yeah, it is definitely a huge topic. The thing I would say is a bit different about EasyJet compared to other organizations I've worked in is the actual culture of the business. There's a fantastic spirit that emanates in everything we do, and I would say you never meet anyone in the organization that doesn't want to help. So it's a helpful culture, but actually that wants to innovate on a constant basis. And I'd only describe it as almost a corporate that feels like a .com at times. And in that the pace is fast, but actually one of the things I think we're super lucky on as a business is our executive team are incredibly approachable. So if you've got a change initiative and you really want to own it, someone will help you get it delivered. And I would say, yes, the great resignation, debate, if you read stuff in the media, it's tough. But I would say the kind of exciting things we've got as a business is it's a really forward-facing organization that's incredibly commercially aware. And what's the saying, Ella, about EasyJet months in years kind of thing? And it's just one of those organizations that's all consuming.
Yeah,
you learn a lot quickly.
Okay. Do you know the saying, Ella?
Well, I think that they talk about, 1 year in EasyJet is like 3 years somewhere else. So it's
brilliant, fantastic. And I mean, listen, that leads on to my last question, and that will be around kind of strategy. Again, kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the things that you guys have mentioned already. How do you devise a strategy for 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years when the only constant given is change itself, Simon?
Yeah, so I guess a few points on that question. So first of all, the key for any HR strategy to me is about alignment to company direction. If you've got an HR strategy that's all about HR initiatives, then it will fail miserably. So for us in our strategy, Ella is constantly getting us to think about what does that mean from an executive team, and where does the business want to go. I would say another really important facet of a 5-year strategy or a 1-year strategy is around a brilliant external radar. So really thinking about, where's the HR market going? What can we learn from others? And I would say that's not necessarily about others within our sector, but others that are doing great job in kind of any industry vertical. And again, we spend regular time as an HR leadership team talking about industry trends. To my mind, what we've done at EasyJet is create, and again, it's probably learning to the pandemic here, we've got a really simplified agenda. And it's a simplified agenda for real good reason, which is we want to do the things we do brilliantly well. So it's about simple few things. And again, our agenda for this year is 3 simple things. It's around employee retention / recognition. It's about being ready to fly the summer. So as you can imagine, getting ready to fly at volume is going to create a lot of work for us. So it's about how do we mobilize and get ready for that. And then finally, it's about employee experience. So in a strange kind of way, I guess you've kind of walked us through our HR agenda, which is brilliant. But underpinned to all of that is a detailed program plans, but also clear, demonstrable business metrics around what we're trying to do. And again, this kind of comes back to my point on commerciality, which is a real focus on commercial HR that makes a difference to the organization. And what I would say is, as we evolve into a 2, 3, 4, 5-year strategy, I think the key to me would be about alignment of that strategy. So spending time with our leadership team at senior level, ensuring that the things we're doing are most relevant to them and are dealing with those kind of more macro business-wide change initiatives. And then the other point I would say is around making sure those commercial outcomes are clear and are polished and understood, so that we can articulate them as you would any business strategy.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. I mean, listen, you've put that in your own kind of description very, very simply and kind of easy to understand. But I imagine there are obviously loads of complexities behind that, of course. Ella, would you like to add to that?
I think what's interesting is to kind of think about then what the qualities, in a way, some of the qualities behind those business plans. And what strikes me is, like I said before, a lot that, it's change management, it's taking the organization one place to the other. These are big programs of change. But I think behind that is this thing about, the humanness, the care, those moments that matter. And also and you can hear it from Simon, a real sense of optimism for the business, which I think is really required by HR leaders for the next, for the coming time. Actually, I think it's really important, that sort of belief and optimism.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listen, that brings us to the end of the discussion. I'd just like to say a really big thank you for you taking the time to articulate and give us some insight into the change and the way EasyJet have had to pivot. And if I can pay you a compliment before we leave, I think it's very refreshing because I certainly get a sense of the culture at EasyJet from having this conversation with the two of you, and I'm sure it'll be very helpful for those that tune in and listen. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Annapurna Erupt. If you enjoyed this episode, please visit our Go Erupt website to get involved in our regular podcasts, video footage, and live events throughout the year. Thank you for listening.